Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. This one I'm going to be going over the NFL draft. I'm going to go position by position here and just go over what I think the fantasy fallout is of each of those positions based off of what happened in the 2025 NFL draft. Lots of stuff to go over here. I think there's a lot of really interesting things to talk about at each position. Some fun storylines, going to be some fun new faces in the NFL to keep our eye on going into the year 2025. And this will be sort of the start of a lot of the content coming out this year. We're making sure I start putting out videos a lot more frequently as we get closer and closer to the real off season, and then of course draft season, and then the real NFL season. So going to be a lot of stuff to talk about here. Really excited about it. Stay tuned for the running back, wide receiver, and tight end videos. Those should come out pretty soon after this one. I'll try and get them all out in pretty short succession, so that way you guys aren't waiting too long for that. But should be a lot of fun. And then, of course, any questions or comments, just let me know in the comments below. Good to be back, guys. Let's get started. Starting things off with Cam Ward, the obvious sort of crown jewel of this NFL draft class at the quarterback position. Went first overall for a reason. I think he's a really talented player. He gets comps to guys like Patrick Mahomes. I think it's kind of silly to call him that kind of player, but he does do a lot of stuff off script, off schedule plays. Not quite like a pure runner, but he's certainly somebody that can extend plays, get out of the pocket, and make things happen there. So I think Cam Ward's a talented player. I do think that the Titans probably did find their quarterback of the future here. I don't think he's going to be a superstar or anything, but I do think he can be a really solid NFL quarterback, and that's going to be a huge bump for anything that the Titans had, especially compared to last year when they were rolling out guys like Will Levis and Mason Rudolph. And honestly, the landing spot's not horrible either. Calvin Ridley is a really solid receiver. You kind of need help at wide receiver 2 there. They've got Tyler Lockett, they've got Treylon Burks, but Chigakonkwo, really quality pass catcher in his own right. And then both running backs can catch the ball as well. And then this defense is not good at all, so you're going to be in a lot of negative game scripts. You're probably going to see Cam Ward throw the ball a lot more than they maybe want him to have to do as a rookie. But that being said, he just immediately upgrades the entire offense relative to what they had last season. Calvin Ridley was honestly not horrible last year, and I think this year he should be even better. He's only 30, so we should be okay there. I view him as like a low-end wide receiver 2 this year, and if Cam Ward comes out and plays like we saw some of the rookies last year, like if he comes out and he's just as good as Jackson or Jaden Daniels was last year, Ridley would be in line for potentially a top 15 kind of season. So having that ceiling there is worth noting, and I think Ridley's going to be a guy that might end up on a lot of my teams depending upon where he's drafted. Chigakonkwo also becomes a pretty quality late round flyer in my eyes. I've always liked the talent. We've seen flashes of high end production out of Okonkwo, and this is again an opportunity where he could potentially be the number 2 target in the offense. That's sort of something that we look for like high end production at the tight end position. Just keep an eye on Okonkwo. He's a good player. The offense should be better here, so I do like him as one of the later round options. And then, not likely, but I'll just mention Treylon Burks. Every time I've watched him play, I do still think he's talented. I know it hasn't really come to fruition just yet, but there's an opportunity here for Burks to be the wide receiver 2 in this offense. It could be Tyler Lockett. I think you'll likely see Burks, Lockett, and Calvin Ridley start the year as the first 3 wide receivers in this team. So I think Burks has one more shot maybe to be relevant. Not super important, but like if he's on waivers in a dynasty league or something, just keep an eye on him. I don't think he should be just yet. There's a chance for a late career breakout there. For Spears and Pollard, mostly unaffected here. There is probably a slight bump in touchdown upside for both of them. So I think Pollard's going to be like a low-end running back 2 going into next year, and Spears is a guy that he's flex viable. He's got upside if Pollard were to miss time. We've seen that before. And then, both these guys can catch the ball. Cam Ward will dump it down to them if need be. So I like that as well. And then for Cam Ward specifically, he himself is not a run-first quarterback, so he's not someone that's going to be like a top 5 quarterback by any means. He's not going to do what Jaden Daniels did last season, but he will scramble. He's got some ability there, so we could see like a ceiling scenario where maybe he's like Bo Nix from last season. And I think in general, you'll probably look at him as a guy that you could maybe spot start in the year 2025 while he's a rookie. But in Dynasty, I think he's a guy that's probably going to be a long-term starter in the league and does certainly have value there. Next up, we got Jackson Dart is the only other quarterback going off the board in the first round this year. He's a talented player, and I think he can be a decent NFL starter. He's got a really good deep ball. He's pretty mobile. Actually, probably runs the ball a lot more than people give him credit for. So I think he's a guy that can work in the NFL long term, especially if Brian Daboll can stay in New York. I think he's a good fit for Brian Daboll in that offense. But he's likely going to sit all of 25. It sounds like they do want him to sort of operate as the number 3 quarterback in this offense behind Russ and Jameis. It's still a bump for guys like Malik Neighbors long term because at least there's a chance that they did address the quarterback position long term there. So I like that, but for 2025, I don't think it really matters. It maybe negatively impacts the ceiling of guys just a little bit because I think the odds of Jameis Winston starting at any point sort of dropped. It's possible that Winston ends up being a training camp cut. Just like, Winston would have certainly elevated the entire offense. He's not necessarily going to help them win games just because of the turnovers, but he does air it out to over 400 yards and 4 interceptions all the time. So that scenario, that odds of that happening sort of took a little bit of a hit here. But I think in the future, Jackson Dart could be the kind of guy that ends up being like a perennial low-end quarterback one. Again, really good deep ball, can run the ball. He's going to add some value with his legs. That's what we're looking for in fantasy. So in Dynasty, I like him as like a solid option. And then 2025, probably just a non-factor here. Next, we got Tyler Shuck. I believe that's how you pronounce his name. Anyone in the comments can correct me if I'm wrong there. He's picked early in round 2, I believe, with the 8th pick in round 2 by the New Orleans Saints. And honestly, he might be the starter for the Saints this season. There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding Derek Carr with his shoulder injury. It's possible he's good to go starting week 1. It's possible he misses the entire year. So that's obviously something we need to keep an eye on. But he is a quarterback that has the potential to be immediately fantasy relevant, or at least have an impact on fantasy immediately. Overall, looking at him, I think he's a mediocre talent. This obviously, if you are on Twitter or anything, I'm sure you've seen that one clip of him making a really horrendous throw at his, I think it was at his combine, it might have been his pro day. He's better than that, obviously. There's a lot of good stuff on there about him. He's probably a lot better than what they had behind Derek Carr last season, so I think it's an upgrade for the Saints offense a little bit, just relative to what they had with the backups. But the Saints didn't win a game last year without Derek Carr. Not that Derek Carr is good, but he is so much better than anything else they have on this offense. If Derek Carr misses time, this entire Saints offense is probably going to suck, and I think that still is true if Shuck ends up starting. So not super excited about it. I think he will be relevant. We'll be talking about him because I think he's going to get some starts at some point next year, even if Carr is healthy enough to start week 1. Carr's been banged up several years in a row now, so the odds of that working throughout a whole year, not very good. And in general, I just don't think the Saints are going to be a very good team. So I don't think Shuck's going to have a whole lot of fantasy value himself. Not a super mobile guy. Not an elite passer by any means, just pretty mediocre in my eyes, and not someone that I would expect a lot of, really at all, to be honest, not to be too harsh there. Next in the 3rd round, we had the Seahawks select Jalen Milroe, and this one's actually pretty interesting. Of course, he's going to start off this year and his career behind Sam Darnold, who the Seahawks did give a 3-year, $100 million contract to, but he's by far the most athletic quarterback in this entire draft class. You're going to hear comps to guys like Anthony Richardson, and honestly, he's much more accurate than Richardson. He completed, I want to say, 64% of his passes last year in college, compared to Richardson, who's closer to 50. So he's a much more accurate passer. He's still a freak athlete. A really talented guy. I think we'll see him get used in packages even to start the year. A guy that'll get goal line work. They might put him in on like short yardage situations. He's a talented and interesting prospect. So I think there's upside there for sure. Of course, Sam Darnold is going to start this season, and he's likely, if everything goes right for Seattle, going to be the starter all year. But I think Milroe, of all the quarterbacks drafted in this class, might have the highest ceiling for any of these guys, just because of how athletic he is. He's a guy that could immediately come in and be a top 5 fantasy quarterback if things broke right. I see a scenario where maybe this is sort of what these Seahawks want their identity to be. You've obviously got Mike Macdonald coming over from Baltimore to be the head coach. Not saying he's Lamar Jackson or anything, but there's a lot of comps in terms of what the Seahawks look to be trying to do on offense. They want to be a run-first team, play defense. Jalen Milroe could certainly play into that. So there's a world where going into 2026, Jalen Milroe is the guy they want as their starter. There's an out for the Seahawks in Sam Darnold's contract, so it could certainly make sense for them to move on after this year if things don't go right there. So just keep an eye on that. If he does start, though, it's going to negatively impact guys like JSN and Cooper Kupp. Just would increase the frequency at which they run the ball. Slightly less accurate passing, not as great of a deep ball passer as what Darnold was last year. So the ceiling for those guys goes down, but it could elevate the running game for guys like Ken Walker. So interesting. I want to keep an eye on him. I think he's a really fun player. I'm rooting for him for sure. But it'll just be fun to see what happens with Milroe there. I think there's definitely going to be some excitement around him this year if he gets on the field. Then the last quarterback we're going to talk about specifically in depth is going to be Shedeur Sanders. Certainly the story of the NFL draft this year. Projected by many to be potentially even the first overall pick, but certainly a first-round pick. There were a lot of comps or draft predictions with him going number 2 to the Cleveland Browns. It seemed like everyone thought it was a lock that he wouldn't slip past the Steelers at 21, and he didn't get drafted until the 5th round here to the Cleveland Browns. He was the second quarterback the Cleveland Browns selected. So really what the NFL is telling us here is that they just don't really think he's that good. I know a lot of people that sort of think that they're concerned about the character issues. I don't think there's a whole lot of character issues necessarily. He's not done a whole lot, but he's just, a little cocky. I think a lot of teams think. Apparently didn't necessarily show up very prepared to a lot of team meetings and everything. But the thing is, there are a lot of NFL players that don't exactly have the best off the field life per se. Tyreek Hill, for example. But those players still get drafted highly and still valued highly by franchises if they're really talented on the field. So even with all the off the field stuff, I think people were worried about with Shedeur. Teams are generally willing to put up with those things if you're a superstar and stuff. And what the NFL is saying here is that Shedeur Sanders just does not fit that bill. But with all that being said, a lot of people really do think that he's extremely talented. I'm not necessarily one of those people. I sort of viewed him like where maybe his ceiling is something like a Brock Purdy, a guy that can be really quality game manager, complete a high percentage of his passes, but not somebody that's going to like elevate your franchise. But he could legitimately start for the Browns this season. It's a crowded depth chart. You've got Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dylan Gabriel, and Shedeur Sanders, not to mention Deshaun Watson, who's likely never going to play again for the Browns. But there's an opportunity there for Shedeur Sanders, if he's actually good, to come out and earn the starting job for the Browns as early as week 1. In general, this whole Browns offense likely not going to be fantastic regardless of which of those 4 ends up starting for them. Joe Flacco probably gives them the highest ceiling, but it's just not a great scenario there. In general, I'm not really adjusting my expectations for any Browns players based off of this selection, just because there's even a high chance that he might not even see the field for them. But we just got to keep an eye on it. He's probably got the most upside of any of the quarterbacks in the roster, because if he ends up being worthy of like the first round talent that a lot of people gave him, then of course it would be a really huge deal for the Browns, and it could be something that could elevate that offense. So something to keep an eye on in Dynasty. I view him as like a late round pick in Superflex. Like if you want to take him late in the second, early in the third in Superflex, go for it. Same thing, even if it's not Superflex, you can. It's a dart throw, but just historically speaking, 5th round draft picks at quarterback. There are, of course, stories of those working out, but in general, they're not going to. So the odds of him having like a high-end career, just history would tell you that it's not there, but he's an interesting story, big name. It's definitely worth mentioning, but it'll be interesting to see if he can see the field at any point. And other than that, I just wanted to list off any of the other quarterbacks drafted and give a quick snippet about them. Dylan Gabriel, maybe a little bit unfair for me to not mention him before Sanders. He was drafted by the Browns in round 3. Played for Oregon last year. Not a super talented guy. I don't necessarily think he's someone that's going to work out. I don't think there's a whole lot of ceiling there, but just worth mentioning, he could also get some starts for the Browns this year. Kyle McCord, drafted by the Eagles in the 6th round. That's not going to matter. Will Howard, drafted by the Steelers in the 6th round. That's sort of interesting just because the Steelers don't really have quarterbacks on the depth chart right now. You've got Mason Rudolph, Will Howard, and then maybe Aaron Rodgers coming to town. But if Rodgers doesn't show up, Will Howard's got a legitimate shot to start games this year, so it's worth noting him. Riley Leonard out of Notre Dame, drafted to the Colts in round 6. Again, an opportunity where even though he's drafted super late, he could get some starts this year just because you're competing with Daniel Jones and Anthony Richardson. There's a path towards starts there for Leonard. Graham Mertz, drafted to the Texans, probably not relevant unless Stroud goes down. Cam Miller to the Raiders in round 6, again, probably not relevant unless Geno goes down. Curtis Rourke to the Niners, also not relevant unless there's an injury. And then Quinn Ewers, drafted to the Dolphins in round 7, also probably not relevant, but Tua does have an injury history, so just keep an eye on him. He could, of course, get some starts if Tua were to go down this year. So that'll do it for the recap of the NFL draft at the quarterback position. If you guys have any questions or if there's anything I didn't go in depth enough on, just feel free to let me know in the comments. I'm happy to give you guys any additional comments or thoughts that I have there. Up next, I'll be going over the fantasy fallout of the running back position. Lots of big names to talk about there. We've got Gianti and Amari and Hampton going in the 1st round. Really fun stuff to talk about there. Really loaded running back draft class, so I'm really excited to go into that video. Stay tuned for that one. That'll probably come out a couple days from the time this one does, and then I'll try and get the receiver and tight end ones out shortly after that as well. So appreciate you guys stopping by. We'll start getting videos out a lot more frequently here this off season. Going to start ramping up, getting closer to the season, and just really stoked, starting to get super excited about football again. So thanks for stopping by, guys. I'll catch you with the next video, and hopefully you have a good one. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.